There were intense and expensive contests up and down the ballot and across the country in yesterday's primary elections. Voters hit the polls in 7 states, with congressional races testing the influence of Donald Trump. But the race drawing the most attention today was local. In San Francisco, voters recalled progressive District Attorney Chesa Boudin in a contest where crime and public safety were key issues. President Biden, before boarding Air Force One, said he saw a lesson in the results.
I think the voters sent a clear message last night. Both parties have to step up and do something about crime as well as gun violence.
For more on the lessons and the takeaways for both parties ahead of November, we turn to Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter and Marisa Lagos with KQED in San Francisco. Welcome to both of you. Some interesting races to talk about. Amy, I'm going to start with you. You were telling us earlier that you didn't see one overriding headline from all of this, but you did see what you called a similarity among the Republican winners.
Yeah, for Democrats, the goal that they see from these primaries, at least on the Republican side, what they'd like to see is the less than ideal candidate on the Republican side come out of those primaries. And we've seen a couple of examples of that, I think most notably in Pennsylvania, where the candidate who is considered probably the most out of step with that swing state won the primary. But in other races across the country yesterday, what we saw were the candidates who pretty much fit those districts, the candidates that Republican strategists think are the better fit for those candidates, for those districts, win there. So this was a pretty good night for Republicans in terms of putting up the stronger of the candidates to face Democrats.
So from their perspective, here we are early June. That's what it looks like. So Marisa, in your state of California, it's the results in the local races, as we said, that are drawing the most attention. That San Francisco DA race, the Los Angeles mayor's race. Tell us about those.
Yeah, well, here in San Francisco, I mean, this recall has really dominated headlines for months. And this was a very progressive DA. He was a former public defender. His parents spent decades in jail as members of the radical Weather Underground for a robbery they took place in that included 2 police officers who were killed. So in some ways, Chesa Boudin was never well liked by law enforcement here. But I think there was a series of missteps he made, and also just the reality of the past 2 years, the pandemic, the George Floyd protest, the sort of strange crime rate changes we saw over the pandemic. And that also is really playing in Los Angeles, where Rick Caruso, a billionaire developer, spent $40 million just in this primary to boost his name ID, and it worked. He's now in a runoff with U.S. Congresswoman Karen Bass, who's going to be the more sort of traditional Democratic candidate. That is a nonpartisan race, but it's important to note that Caruso was a Republican, then he was a no-party preference voter, and then he re-registered as a Democrat just a few months ago.
So it's interesting, Amy, listening to what Marisa is saying. I mean, there's always a desire at the national level to say, aha, we see a trend. But she's saying it has to do with the individual circumstances, with the candidates, and with what was going on in that race.
Right. We've seen the nationalization of politics now for quite some time, but there is also a truth to all politics being local. But I think what Marisa pointed out, too, is very important, that while the issue of COVID is no longer a front or top issue for voters the way it was, say, in 2020, a top #1 issue, its impact is still being felt. It sort of has the downstream effects on crime, on mental health, on our children and their schooling. And so we're still seeing the aftershocks of this pandemic. And in some ways, it's playing out on these local races, right, where people feeling frustrated with the way the city has or hasn't sort of come back since the pandemic. But it's also playing a part in federal races as well. We're seeing just nationally, 75% of Americans believe the country is off in the wrong direction. A lot of that, of course, is about the economy, but I think it's the sense we're still pretty destabilized. This pandemic may be officially over, but its impact is still here.
Marisa, how did you see that in California? I mean, in terms of the voter interest in these races and turnout, and how animated voters were by what they were watching and listening to.
Well, unfortunately, voter turnout was very low, although it looks like in San Francisco it was slightly higher than statewide. But I think Amy hits on a really good point, which is that people had a lot of time to sit at home during the pandemic and think about what they didn't like. And we've really seen this spate of recalls in California. Again, there's always going to be individual issues in each race, local issues, but I do think that there's a sense of anger with what is not happening out there in the world, whether it is, tents on our streets and homeless folks or increases in crimes. I mean, it's ironic, though, in a city like San Francisco, we saw far less of an increase in violent crime than most major cities did, Republican or Democratic led. And yet, that's people vote with their hearts, right? Statistics is not what matters. And I just think there's a real sense of, at the local level, that incumbents are not getting the job done. Statewide, however, we saw Democratic incumbents, Governor Newsom, Attorney General Rob Bonta, just easily coast into those runoffs. So maybe not as angry at the state level officials.
Amy, just quickly staying on this question about crime and whether people feel safe, is there some kind of national message from this?
Well, I think we're seeing it play out not just in Los Angeles and San Francisco, but also we saw it in the New York mayor's race. Again, these are really local issues, but Democrats still feeling, as you heard from President Biden, feeling somewhat wary of the fact that Democrats had been labeled now for the last couple of years as being for, say, defunding the police, not as strong on pushing back on criminals, electing more progressive DAs. And so Democrats have been trying for the last 2 years to shed that image and to support policies and candidates that are stronger on those issues.
And we've even heard President Biden saying we're not for defund.
That's right.
Trying to push that.
That's right.
And just quickly, I do want to come back to you, Amy, because there were a number of House Republicans who we know voted for an independent commission to look into what happened on January the 6th. Some of them have been pushed or have left politics, but we looked at, there are a number of them who were in primaries yesterday, and what do we see from the results here?
Yeah, overall, Judy, we know that in the next Congress, there are going to be fewer members, either because they retired or resigned, or they lost in a primary, fewer Republican members who either voted to impeach the president, voted for the January 6th commission, even some who voted for the bipartisan infrastructure bill. In other words, supporting Donald Trump still is a major issue, or showing fealty to Donald Trump is still a major issue in these primaries. So what we have in Mississippi, one of the Republicans there, Representative Guest, is likely in a runoff with a Republican who ran to his right in the primary, saying basically he's just not a real Republican. He's a so-called rhino, in part because of his support for the January 6th commission itself. Nothing else but for the January 6th commission. And so when we talk about Trump's hold on the party, he may not have the same influence that, say, he would like to have, but in terms of the kinds of people who are coming back to Washington in 2023, very few of them will have stood up to Donald Trump.
Very, very, yeah. And that's telling when you put it all together.
Right.
Amy Walter and Marisa Lagos, thank you both. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Judy.